Kingdom Come Deliverance II, scheduled for release on February 4th, 2025, is an action RPG developed by Warhorse Studios and coming out on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation platforms. If you want new reviews and exclusive videos coming up on the brand new games, maybe subscribe. So here's my review for Kingdom Come Deliverance II. Battle Bros bath time. Dogs, swords, shields, dogs, and ladies of the night who've had to clap so many times it sounds like applause. And dogs again, just saying. Kingdom Come Deliverance continues the story of the frickin' frack of medieval immersive sins, and that's Hans and Henry, who are just 2 to 3 days out after the ending of the original game, directly following the events of that first title, set in early 15th century Bohemia amidst the turmoil of a civil war, with both of them traveling across the land on a new mission to Trotsky Castle. After a short prelude, the game starts out with you entering the new land and making camp with your fellow party members, learning the ropes about interactions with the game. The best part here is that as the men sit down to discuss life, this is also where you flesh out Henry's additional skills, and this reminds me of the ancient heady days of titles like Ultima, with you sitting at the fire telling tall tales of maidens and drinking games. It's an elegant solution to what can be a very clumsy part of gameplay. And it turns what is sometimes a contentious starting moment in titles to something that becomes a continuous moment. So for example, if you discuss some activity you performed, or let's say just the work you did with your dog, that skill is adjusted as well as others. It offers a completely natural way to feel like Henry moved up a bit and had experiences prior. The sense of camaraderie here, that ultimate feeling of group established prior to the time of this game, whether you played that or not, is solidified right here. I've rarely felt that turn with a group like this so quickly and succinctly. The trading of stories, the oratory amongst friends, of tawdry details is exactly what you think it is. I adore games that nest the fiction into the function just enough, making even the initial couple talks and skills feel like a natural progression of characters living in a world where mud is bathwater. And in a world like that, things don't always go well, and that establishes the starting of the story that slowly evolves into a tale of backstabbing and skullduggery, a series of encounters that for those days would have probably been the origination of an entire creation myth. What works so well here is the merging of these two tales, the main one that weaves through the various cities and forests, plains, and plateaus like a damn Sound of Music recreation, while the other is the world and the quests themselves, ripe for taking without feeling rotten with too much waste. Both, however, are wrapped up in a first-person immersive sim game that has you doing odd jobs, stopping major conflicts, causing others, and battling with bad guys, consistently interacting with characters in the game world, making your own armor and weapons, and trying to navigate your world, which is mired in war, political turmoil, and a lot of times get knocked off your horse and get the crap beat out of you. When it comes to gameplay, there's a lot to cover, so firstly, we're going to discuss stats, perks, and some changes to how all this works. I'm going to give examples also of 4 to 5 types of ways I played Henry to give you an example of the immersive sim elements. When it comes to your major stats, you have speech, charisma, speed, conspicuousness, noise, visibility, strength, agility, vitality, and health. You also have energy and nourishment. For things like your typical armor stats, they include weight, defense against piercing, slashing, and bludgeoning, and when it comes to the weapons, the same, except the descriptions are how much damage they do to each type. As you continually adventure through the game, you go up in level, and you get points within particular stats, and those stats or those categories of skills have perks underneath them. It's all fairly well nested. For example, if you go up in Thievery, there are multiple perks you can buy within that group, and they deliver consecutive large bonuses or skill adjustments, large enough that you feel that risk versus reward of what you end up wanting to buy versus what you probably or maybe should buy, at least at first. But for a moment, looking at health, energy, and nourishment, health is, of course, your overall hit points. Energy is modified by how much you have or haven't rested, or if you've had sex with somebody. Also, where you sleep can affect that, and nourishment directly is related to food. Now, when it comes to this, that sort of merges into other things as well, but nourishment in particular can be troublesome. You have to definitely watch out what you eat in this game. If you overeat, you can affect other stats. And in a way, that interplay is used quite often here. For example, take the weapon perks. Since this is an immersive sim, much of the upgrades are related to their use versus, say, getting a point to spend somewhere. So working with swords doesn't directly translate into warhammers or clubs when it comes to their experience, and yet using them, getting into battle in any way, and basically just staying alive will secondarily work on raising your physical traits over time, which then, of course, will allow you to more adequately use something even if you don't have training in it. That same interplay sits solidly in the conversation system. When you jump into discussions with NPCs, icons representing your major social traits and what their skills are during those discussions. Just having a high score won't actually matter sometimes because that character's reaction is completely negative to anybody trying to be forcible in that way. Let me give you an example of how. In my 90 plus hours with the game, I jumped into various different versions of Henry for myself. The first was Henry is a shrewd thinker, talking when needed, diligent when in repose, and decisive when a decision is made, always outfitted with exactly the right tools for the job. That meant making my own weapons when I couldn't buy them, spending hours rummaging the half-baked fields of poppies I'd already Pac-Maned through to get spare ingredients, and working the best deals despite the time sinks. An overabundance of caution also meant that anyone standing on the roadside wasn't going to be worth the trouble, as bandits always work in doubles. My other Henry was the Billy Goat of heroes. If he wanted something, he was just going to friggin' headbutt his way into success and let the world be damned. It matters more here, though, because the responsibility of what I do is greater, and unfortunately, the risks, the expectations of reliability is increased on everything I do, and the reality of the situations reflected in the quests needing to be done for others in a different way that I normally could just pass up as the other character. My other Henry, and maybe my favorite, was a character whose motto was pretty much, I'm just going to go out and do this thing, and if it doesn't work, I'm going to straight up pretend I never planned on doing it. So in this way, he was every one of your friends on a bad Friday night when the arresting officer asks you a question and he just says, I followed my pals, and spends all of his points in a skill called Shrugs a Lot. Here, I bought what I could, but most important, my aims were to make life, combat, and whoring the smoothest it could be. Every person I talked to, I greased their palm. Throwing just a couple extra dollars into every single deal quickly also raises reputations wherever I wanted. I shirked hard work because Henry already did that, and my Henry was more about revenge and reward in equal order quickly. Now, you may think, okay, many games let you play characters like that, and they do, but it's immersive sims that feed back into that gameplay when it comes across multiple systems, where the difference is notable. The reward for playing like this, my shrewd Henry pissed off people by not talking unless he had something to say, where sometimes here not saying anything is considered insanely rude, or deciding that helping out somebody wasn't worth it, which meant deals couldn't be done, and it also meant having to go and find someone else to do it, or another way around. Billy Goat Henry had to work harder to be ready for anything, and yet at the same time, sometimes innocents got hit with a mace during a swing or two, which resulted in a trip to the stocks to be chastised or whipped. All worth it, because Billy Goat Henry knew that every punishment there was an ability to talk your way out of and gain vital information, possibly just because you were behind the scenes when you got caught, on where an item may be for later thieving. On his feet, Henry was most chaotic, each action causing ripples from reputation to lack of money to overabundance of money but not enough storage for the items I wanted, to relationships that didn't really matter at all until 9/10 of the way through the game, and then suddenly revitalized themselves and became super important. Regardless of which one I played in the game, it all came down to what you have, how you use it, and that means weapons and armor. In Kingdom Come 2, Henry's arsenal is much the same as the first game with some additions. You have your swords, you have crossbows now, axes, maces, polearms, and firearms, which I have to say take forever to fire, but can punch through an armored knight if you have to get a shot off before they run you down. You can also just say screw it and beat somebody to death with no weapons at all. Each weapon here, regardless of your own skills, have their own base, crushing, slicing, and piercing damage, as well as weight and speed and durability, requiring repairs and sharpening to keep them in tip-top shape. You can also get belts and pouches, which let you fast equip items in combat that you normally couldn't, which can be the difference between Henry and horribly dead Henry. That also means when it comes to armor, the game still tries to replicate something closer to accuracy than other titles in the genre. You can't just put a friggin' steel bucket on your head and call it good. That's like a car with no shocks or seats. You have to put on padded head layering first. The same goes for your body parts, really allowing for you to mix and match all sorts of different items, or cheapest, outfit in any way you want, and you can just put it all together. With armor impacting your conspicuousness, your noise, your visibility, and overall energy, it is vital for you to make sense and understand the outfit section smartly, with you able to change pretty quickly and needing to, especially if you decide you want to sneak into someplace or rampage through the damn spot. And after you've done all this, unless you want to be pals with the roughnecks and ruffians of the game, you always want to keep your clothing and yourself clean. If you don't, it majorly impacts interactions, to the point that people consistently call out in horror when Henry peacefully walks down the main street with suspiciously human-looking meat parts still strung across his newly crafted Saxon plate armor. When it's all said and done, you take those and you go into combat. Now, combat's changed a bit in the setup here for the new game. The 5-pointed star of directional attacks is pared down to 4. This works well enough. It doesn't really significantly change anything other to make it maybe a little bit more fluid. The other change is that the parry, countering, and stuns are faster and not as animation locked as the original game. That being said, while enemies may be a bit more cautious here, don't for a second think that they don't attack at the same time, or that you can get away with spamming something, because missing attacks may be shorter in their overall feeling of recovery, but the enemy takes advantage of everything. While it's been said that the enemy's less aggressive, I did not find that true throughout the game. Cases where 4 to 5 enemies may sit back for a moment, sure, to see what weapon I have or what I'm going to do or who I'm going to attack. But once I did so, they started moving forward into the sides, requiring me to consistently be on the move at all times. Multi-opponent fighting is both easier due to those changes and some of that fluidity, but still pretty crushing if you do make a single mistake. Now, you can block easily with the shield icon or just use the animation tells of the enemy aiming to open up spots. If an enemy has a sword to the right and you attack there, he more easily blocks and can counter easier. So you're consistently moving and adjusting, trying to aim at open spots. You can also counter with the second mouse button on PC, which is a change to the original. Nevertheless, controlling the direction of attack still feels like somebody watched a training segment in Kingdom of Heaven but didn't grasp the futility of matching to an almost Simon Says style game with the smallest directional change requirements known to man. However, as you level up, you do buy those skills and increases that can offset that, slowly going from the feeling that Henry's almost consistently in over his head until the point to you're introducing yourself as Tyrannosaurus Dex, a dexterity-based meat machine with backspines made of all the different swords sticking around in the sheaths that you have. Is the combat improved? Absolutely. Does it still feel like Henry's a bag of meat? Yes, absolutely. Then again, perhaps you decide not to fight at all and you want to go stealth. In general, stealth works the same way here and works generally the same way pretty much in all these games. You consistently alternate between terror when some guard decides to investigate a sound or changes a path, which keeps you on edge constantly though. And while the game does do some things to inform you of what exactly is going on, at times it can be difficult to sort of parse the requirement of what exactly you need in a particular area and just how aware they are. This is slightly impacted by AI that's pretty wonky. Guards will see you and then you can try to talk your way out of it. Sadly, if they're in front of where you need to go though, which happens whenever you're behind enemy lines or in some way in a patrol area, the moment you move past, they react again, which means you can be reacted to 4 or 5 times as you're just trying to walk past the guy to leave, which is what they asked you to do in the first place. However, one of the greatest things here is you have all kinds of different skills and abilities to use, as I said before, but you also have Mutt, which allows for you to have him bark in a corner, causing enemies to pay attention to him versus you. And the guards and the NPCs will go look at him and try to figure out what's going on with him as you slip on by. So there's a lot of different ways you can try even the very specific major categories, which is your combat, stealth, and negotiation, let's say. Of special note, let's discuss for a second lockpicking and pickpocketing. While they both had slight changes, the one thing that people probably want to know is, have they been generally improved? In general, I would say barely. There have been some small mechanical adjustments, but to me, really the skill system is where a lot of the excellence in this game end up paying off, even in some of the more cumbersome moments. For example, the thievery skill itself. Once you get a point there and it opens up, there's multiple different things you can choose. So for example, you could get a skill that just makes it much easier to open up a low-level lock. But at the same time, because you're sneaking and doing things, and now you're able to unlock those low-level locks, you need less lockpicks, which means less money spent, and it sort of feeds back into itself. I like how those skill systems now work. Once you get out, or hell, if you just want to get in, you may need to travel. There is fast travel, and you'll find yourself using a great deal of it to traverse in one spot or the other, as long as you've visited there prior, but you can also just say screw it and run, or leap onto your horse. Now, you can steal these horses and later set up new ownership, or you can get one via a quest pretty quickly in the game. Horses have their own statistics and entire line of armor, bridling, saddles, and more, which lets you store and put more gear than you possibly could on yourself at any time. If you want to, you could sit down and compare horses like you're going to go to the local show and want to discuss the finer points of halter versus canter, but that's not what this game is about. It's more about just finding the horses wherever you are, deciding to ride it, steal it, sell it, borrow it. Lo and behold, if you steal a horse and decide not to sell it or pay for it to claim it for yourself, that sucker actually works its way back to the owner, a grass-fed Hoover vacuum, chomping back to Farmer Ned like a bluegrass Pac-Man. That was awesome. Of course, you're going to want to understand control on the horse or off of it. Initially, this can be difficult. You need to make sure to praise the horse, make sure most of all the enemies are away from the horse, because if they hit it, they can cause it to buck, and that'll throw you off. The key to success here really is understanding praise as well as slowly riding the horse to upgrade your skills. Just don't get caught stealing them, because it's worth a lot. Now, let's talk for a moment about reputation, because stealing a horse, stealing pretty much anything, affects that reputation, and there's a whole sort of crime system here. Reputation is tracked across a huge number of locations and characters in the game, characters with various different political aspirations, or at least groups that those characters are involved with. I like this because it added just one layer of a little bit of complexity where I had to decide how exactly was I going to go about repairing a reputation. I ended up with one of the characters, as I stated, spending money during a lot of deals to pay a little bit extra, and the reputation went up. There's other ways to do it as well. And solidly, the best thing about this game is any of the things I've mentioned prior, none of them really feel wrong. Combined with all of this other stuff and the activities, it means you're almost always off kilter a little bit, and it's always dynamic. 1 second taking on a main quest, the next trying to find a way in which you can. Raising up your reputation and figuring out how to do it, and figuring out how to deal with people that you've pissed off, trying to figure out exactly where to go, where you can sleep. It can all involve a bit of exploration. And via that simple process of exploration, the locations become familiar. Now, reputation across the quests and throughout different factions alters available discussions as well, quests and results, because somebody may just be too mad to even talk to you. So sometimes you need to take care of yourself, and 2 ways you can do that, especially when it comes to making money, is alchemy and crafting. Crafting with you is hammering out the general shape of items. Make sure to listen to the sound of the tone of the hammer swing and Henry's occasional comments about the piece of work. Is it too hot or is it cooled off? Collecting recipes and items for each creation you get that's better and better. Alchemy is sort of the same way. It has you mixing reagents, starting with the base liquid like water, wine, and so on, and then adding in ingredients, sometimes rough or ground up. Tracking how long the item has to cook, sometimes requiring different methods at different steps, and then finally storing it. Recipes can be found in quests from characters and in some wild locations, including sneaking into some places and grabbing them. It's very cool, and it always had me feeling sort of special as I was flipping through the mixtures and recipes. Whenever you do that, it feels a little bit like you're a hedge wizard preparing a poultice in a low magic D&D game. Finding all the items, reading the recipes, the main menus are where you're going to go. And you've got your journal, map, inventory, quests, and lore. What is odd also here is it can feel cumbersome when moving through these. The pages are displayed in an almost screen plus system explanation. For instance, leaping into skills and prepping to buy them shows the skills and the character, but the description for the skills is halfway off the screen and requires a button to sort of feed it back onto the screen. Go to some of the pages here, and the same thing ends up occurring. This also happens in, for example, the inventory section, where finding the total attribute bonuses and negatives of an item can really only be seen on the side, and it's just slightly off. It looks almost off kilter. You press a button to drag it out. This can result in a HUD that makes you feel like you're going into the center of something and opening up the sides of almost a 3-piece binder a lot of times. Doesn't really bother me too much, but as you jump in so many times through a long period of gameplay, you do wonder, would it have been better to, in some way, maybe make Henry look a little smaller in the icon view and put those underneath it? I can tell you one thing, Kingdom Come Deliverance II is one hell of a huge game, detailed, it's simmy, it's crunchy at times, both when it needs to be and maybe sometimes when it doesn't, and probably increased by those elements in concert. It also has bugs, even on this very last patch. First, in particular, the NPCs. They get stuck, they also drop from the sky. They weave into your body or through or between your cutscenes. They get caught on your friends. They all spawn into one particular doorway and refuse to move. Also, merchants have a tendency to back away from the table sometimes, even if you're fully washed and cleaned, which is what I thought the original problem was. But that means they have a hard time getting them to trigger a discussion to buy. And remember, they go to bed at a very particular time. And if you go behind the counter to try to get close to them, they warn you they're going to call the guard. Also, Henry still has trouble getting up steps across this friggin' game world. Countless times. I couldn't count how many steps I had to leap up. Doing that can suck if you're in stealth and the guy in front of you is up the stairs or slowly going upstairs and getting ready to turn around, and that can cause a loss of game time. Also, the game's save system, as I said, which saves if you choose to quit. That's great. Or when you sleep, or when you drink, save snobs. So it's overall actually very workable as a save system. Of course, we're not going to all want to industrially turn off the game to save it, but you could if you wanted to. The autosave system, where it saves, is a bit troublesome. The game has a tendency to save after a discussion, and that can be pretty much anyone. That's fine when you're talking to people normally. You end up talking and you fail the social skill and you get in a fight and you die because you have your sword put away. No big deal. You decide to open up that autosave. The autosave is mid-punch or with the weapon away, but the enemy's already moving when it loads in. So it sometimes is hard to pull a weapon as they are beating you to absolute death, getting in free hits as you're trying to pull that sword up. So as a package, when it comes to gameplay, what do we have? An immersive sim. I absolutely love the different layerings. There's a couple places where the layering isn't as deep. That's fine, because in other places it seems so deep that it's difficult to count just how far it's going down. And you can sort of imagine where one layer ends up impacting the other. That's great stuff. At the same time, the immersive sim element, just like a lot of immersive sims we have got in the past, from Prey to Dishonored's, there are some idiosyncrasies. Graphically, the game has all the pomp and circumstance of the original, as well as a bit of dirt and stink, but it offers an improvement from Kingdom Come 1. But what's most astounding here is how friggin' huge it is, literally massive. Some of the locations in the full-blown towns, with all the sorts of burbs and burrows, alleyways, alehouses, whorehouses, bunkhouses, armories, there's a feeling of lived-in resonance here, where instead of a couple buildings being faced for the front or a visitor who is just going to show up and talk to the main counter, here you have not confoundingly basic locations like a city in Skyrim with the same 14 people somehow running everything. Kingdom Come 2 is completely the opposite, where even the smaller villages can have 10, 20, 30 people milling around, smoke billowing out of chimneys, pawns inset inside castle walls. It is crazy design. In some ways, it is a massive step forward. While not all the faces, as I said, show improvement in emotion or shadows, it's a nice insight into the improved lighting system that we do have that makes them look better for the most part. And those improvements continue. Exploration of the forest, I think, just looks awesome. Their foliage system already was impressive. It's really second to none in many ways for delivering consistent environmental conclusions that your brain would draw from everything that you see and feeling realistic whenever you get to that particular conclusion. For example, a gully goes exactly where it's supposed to. A little pond seems to flow correctly. This is all stuff that you notice as you play the game. And when you interact with characters, you can practically smell the stink on them as they get smattered with dirt and blood, as you do too. Just walking petri dishes of diphtheria. But it's the little things also, like bubbles coming out of your lord's shorts when he steps into the water for a bath. Realistic shorts bubbles. That needs to be on every game's technical list from now on. Graphically, Kingdom Come Deliverance certainly does look better than predecessor. Advanced lighting, improvements in some modeling, certainly in the textures in a lot of places, and definitely in some of the facial features. When it comes to performance, on a 4090 with a 7800 AMD, I was running an 85 FPS and above, 4K, all settings on Ultra. Now, there's an experimentation or experimental level here that you can choose as well, but I didn't jump into that too often because in a lot of games, experimental really means for the next class of cards. DLSS quality was 15 FPS boost, while performance was 30. FSR was around 10 plus for the quality when it came to the FPS, and about 20 to 25 boost to the FPS with performance. Now, this performance curve was replicated with the 3080 and the 2080 down to pretty suitable resolutions for those cards. It's surprisingly well reasoned for a game like this, but also shows smart development in the game's desire to not switch out engines, or at least deciding to take the original one and just shoring that up. With DLSS and FSR, you should be set up very well. These FPSs were reflected pretty much worldwide, with some locations, even with vast raw distances that you'll see in this footage, dropping off by just a few FPS. And when it comes to consoles, PS5 and Xbox Series X are native 1440p at 30 FPS. They also have a performance mode at 1080p. Both use FSR for upscaling. The Series S is 1080p at 30 FPS. If you decide you want to jump in here, be aware the Xbox has a couple issues with FPS when it comes to the performance, either version, the Series S or X. I was told that they are working on that right now. When it comes to settings, the most important one that seems to have the largest impact instantly on any image and its stability is shadows. In all of my testing, between low and high to experimental, the one place you notice issues is if you set shadows to low. It's really not good looking at all. You see shadow swim. Imagine just instability and tremendously noticeable problems right away. So even at low settings, setting the shadows up a couple steps dramatically improves the look of the game. Now, that doesn't mean everything is sunshine and rainbows. The characters, I do have to say, sometimes they look great, some characters don't. But when they strip down to fight or get stripped down or find some other way to have their shirts off, the modeling can look really rough in the gameplay. Animation can also look really janky with some interactions not touching the actual game world when they're doing work outside their farms or just interacting at all. It's not all the time, but while some parts look current gen in this game like those, the engine's reuse, despite improvements, are noticeable. As a package, though, graphically, the world scope's truly impressive, not just in size or breadth or in the general appeal of its presentation. It's just a large world spread across 2 maps, each with their own dangers and hazards, healthy rewards, and healthier barmaids. It's not only incredibly enjoyable to explore, it's just deliriously free of map mess, aside from the main cities, where icons for most vendors as well as track quests are going to display in an alpha icon system, ABC kind of system for quests. Phenomenal.
Damn it. Right back where we started.
They blend traditional medieval instruments, orchestral compositions. They have new dynamic music that adjusts based on your actions, the battles, the exploration. There's a ton of solid music here, and that's worked and reworked to adjust and layer to deliver these huge cut pieces, almost a John Williams style and big budget movie style, but with the interactivity within the game's instantly noticeable quieter sections. And then combined with a lot of chorus and a lot of leads that just end up bringing a human feeling to the entire soundtrack. The hero buildup of brass and stirring bits calls back to older pieces from movies, and they feel very old. There's something about it that I really like the King's trumpeters are following along behind me. It doesn't mean that there's not more ambient pieces. It just means that it feels a little bit closer to some of the games that we may have got in the past when CDs had just become a thing and you started getting full soundtrack audio on some of this stuff. There's a lot of cool filled melodies when you walk into the wrong house and you find out you're trespassing and have to figure out why the lady's holding 3 sausages and warning you better leave right away. And you're trying to figure out if things are going to get inappropriate.
Hear me? Search those bushes good and proper!
When it comes to the sound presentation, that is also good, almost always excellent, especially exploring. For example, there's thunderstorms, and you're hearing it approach, and you're counting the seconds between the strike or the sound, or you're listening to someone move around one level below you, creaking on the floor, and you're trying to decide, is it best to leap out or go to the door? And you can see or maybe catch a glimpse of them. Horses' bridles clang, Henry's heavier armor rattles and clatters when he sprints, perfectly timed with his steps. The same can be said for weapon strikes and fighting. You have that dull thump of a sword hitting a shield or a mace smashing plate mail, especially when it comes to the width, which can be hard in audio, especially when you look at headphones, soundbars, TVs, speakers, all various configurations. It means an almost infinite possibility in how that space is delivered to you when it comes to the audio. For example, if it's too tight, you can have difficulty understanding where an enemy is, right or left, and where to go in the shadows. If it's too wide, the center stage is lost, and it's hard to identify if something in front of you is really right in front of you or farther off until directionally they move to the right and left, and it feeds in. Aside from some odd acoustic issues, especially in larger city squares, where some characters sounded like they were coming from the other end of a coliseum, it worked very well.
Well, Henry, looking forward to new adventures? Adventures that will become the stuff of legends?
Of course I am. We'll show them what fine fellas have turned up on their doorstep.
You bet we will. We'll hand over our important message and then hop, skip to the nearest tavern. We'll drink to our success and chase some local wenches, eh?
All the voice actors who return to this story return here to voice the characters, and they're phenomenal. Henry isn't a character of singular wit either. While those can be displayed when you succeed at talking yourself out of being caught, where there's this amazing focus on Henry explaining some crazy diatribe about inanimate objects and the blathering he does, or he tells a guard about a girl fooling him, so that's why he crashed at someone's abandoned barn illegally. Instead, the nuance here of this character is working through the massive series of life-changing events in short time. Hearing him explain why he still wanted revenge was powerful in its simplicity, reflecting a man who had learned how to friggin' read in the first game. But then, hearing him discuss diplomacy, that same life of learning your place in a rigid system of roles, comes out with a sharp and barbed wit, with a logic that actually caused everybody else in the room to look and go, you know what? This dude's friggin' right. Also, Hans has his own growth and troubles and issues and revelations I won't get into here, but the frickin' frack of Kingdom Come 2 nail it. Also, the new characters are amazing. I can't or won't spoil much of this, but I can say that they're awesome. Almost no one is one note unless they need to be, and then later they don't need to be, and suddenly you hear a profound change. You guys will probably notice that. I won't say much more, but other than a few odd-sounding recordings from side characters that sounded like they might have been delivered or recorded at different times, I will say that there were a couple times where the subtitles didn't match up with the voices that were being spoken. I don't mean the names or the people. I mean the actual words themselves. It felt like there might have been a little bit of play testing to decide particular things that they wanted to say, but it still ended up carrying the emotion across. Speaking of emotion, voices, sound, music, gameplay, all this together. Yeah, it's a big review. Sorry, but this is a huge game, and I do want to cover this one in depth. Let's talk about the fun factor, how it all comes together. The main quest does move you from particular village to village, but it's the smaller, out-of-the-way places and the exploring that I liked here. It's moving about the game world. You see what's just over the hill, and that elicits this excitement. And it really does, resulting in a profound sense of discovery throughout a great deal of this game. That discovery is not only in the direct relation to the world itself, but also in many ways to the slight leanness that we see here. This is a world exhibiting a desire to not put a ton out there. Gone are a lot of those open world activities that we see in other games I've talked about. Now, this thinner selection of deeper activities here that allows you to go about, craft, or follow, whether you're gathering materials or making reagents or mixing all kinds of alchemical potions or just taking an odd job for various characters within the game. The reason why this works so well, the reason why I found it so enjoyable, was that those longer moments that were spent in those spots, well, perhaps not as engaging in a feeling of consistent new surprises, solidifies you within the game world. You end up finding a blacksmith that you like their attitude and consistently return to craft items there. Perhaps because their reputation with you is at a higher level, or you get slightly better prices, or they have items you like, or you're just attracted to one of his daughters, or it's because he has a funny story when you first met him. Time spent becomes experience invested, because when it comes to activities, almost nothing here is done on the short shift. Even just mixing a simple agent can take a couple minutes, reducing down to a faster time as you get better, or extending it to make more powerful ones. And that ends up feeding back into the familiarity of the activities themselves. Feels less hodgepodge. In many ways, immersive sims are like the notes and chords, if you think about it. Intrinsically, the notes are poised within the chords, and they can be separated, but when they come together as one, they really sound completely different. The best are ones that build upon both elements, and ultimately, you're left with something completely special. You got some issues, you got some bugs. Ultimately, fun factor is about it all coming together. And the combat works sufficiently enough. I'm not ever going to be in love with this combat. The stealth works for the most part. There's some idiosyncrasies here or there. But as a world, as it comes together, there's some phenomenal stuff going on here. But I always got to tell you about all the good and bad. That's just sort of how these work. The stair issues, the couple bugs I ran into, the NPC stuff that occasionally would happen, those were infuriating. Even when I couldn't get up the friggin' steps, I would just be like, all right, whatever, that sucks. When you are playing this game, the sense of immersion, and as a big immersive sim fan myself and somebody who dives into these and the creation of them, this is worth getting. It is. It's going to have some issues. You're going to probably run into them, but the slightly better save system, slightly better combat, the improved world, the look, the fun that you can have here, it's just primo. It's enjoyable. You guys will be able to see some more videos from me, including probably tomorrow, a video of me just walking around the game world. I hope you guys enjoy this review. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs up. If you like it, come to the Patreon, maybe join the Patreon. It helps out the channel. If you dislike it, come to the Patreon, join it. Maybe you'll help the channel. Doesn't really matter. Whatever you do, I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Peace out.